Alright guys, it's Yae calculation time. If you were wondering whether or not Yae can hit 100,000 damage plus with her skills with just a medium amount of investment, don't worry, she can definitely hit that threshold no problem. Yae Miko is one of the most anticipated character coming in patch 2.5, and today we're going to be doing a full breakdown on her kit and abilities. I'm going to give you a few potential builds, and we're going to take out some preliminary damage using math with a medium amount of investment. I have a Twitch and a Discord as well, links to that down in the description. Swing on by to either if you want to ask any questions. Also remember that everything in this video is based on data mined information, so numbers, scaling, passive abilities, that can potentially change, but for the most part, her high level kit is already mostly set in stone. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. First off, what is Yae Miko's role? Thankfully, her kit is actually pretty simple, and she is definitely designed to be played in two different playstyles currently, and that is an Electro SUB-DPS or as a high damage nuker. This is just how her kit encourages you to play her. It doesn't mean that you can't play her in any other kind of way, so if you wanted to play her as a main carry, you can of course do that. She'll be doing a lot of off-field damage with her elemental skill, and then when her elemental burst is ready, she's going to be able to deal a lot of damage with it. Now let's go ahead and move on to her stats, starting with her attack stat. A base attack of 340 at max level, level 90. This is one of the highest in the game. Top 3 currently right now being Xiao, Eula, and Ayaka. So Yae Miko is definitely up there. If you've been following the leaks very closely around Yae, you'll know that she used to have a very low base attack and that they buffed it to be one of the top. In exchange, her defense and HP were dropped quite significantly. Her defense is 569 at max level, and so she's going to be one of the squishiest 5 stars in the game. Squishier than a lot of 4 stars as well. For reference, many of the other 5 stars in this game are above 600 base defense. And then her HP is only about 10,372 at max level. Also, again, one of the lowest base HP stats in the game, next to Yoimiya and Klee, among 5 stars. So yeah, she's going to be pretty squishy. All of this to offset that high base attack. So she's supposed to do a boatload of damage, right? Well, we'll find out when we take a look at her preliminary damage. These low stats also discourage you to keep her on the field. It instead encourages you to use her as an off-field DPS and then come in when her burst is ready. Her ascension stat is crit rate. So at level 80, you'll have a total of 20%-ish crit rate with the 5% base, and then at level 90, you'll have about 24%. This will definitely help lessen the load on farming artifacts for her. You can focus a little bit more on crit damage. Alright, now let's go ahead and move on to her skills, starting with her normal and charge attacks. There's nothing really special here, but I kind of just wanted to note that her charge attack is actually one of the lowest scaling attacks among all of the Catalyst characters. It's similar to the scaling as Yanfei and Sucrose, specifically for Yanfei when Yanfei has 3 seals. Yanfei has very low scaling if she has no seals at all, actually. Funny enough, the characters that have the highest charge attack scaling among Catalyst users is Ningguang and Lisa, both 4 stars. This low scaling on her charge attacks further discourages you to play her as an on-field playstyle, unfortunately, but of course it doesn't mean that you can't. Next up is her E skill. Yae will summon a Sessho Sakura that periodically strikes one nearby opponent with electro damage. She has a maximum of 3 charges on this skill, and only 3 can exist at any one time. Placing more Sessho Sakuras will increase the level of each Sakura, and in turn also increase its damage scaling. At C0, your first E skill cast will start your turrets at level 1, and then it goes up to level 3. Each Sessho Sakura has a duration of 14 seconds with a 4-second cooldown, so very low cooldown, allowing you to reposition pretty easily. The damage scaling of this attack at level 8 is 151.7% per lightning strike. However, since each Sessho Sakura can only hit one single enemy, the most AoE damage we can deal is only up to 3 enemies with 3 turrets on the field. Each turret is also going to fire off 5 bolts of lightning during its entire 14-second duration, once every 3-ish seconds, a little bit under 3. So if you allow your turrets to be active for their entire duration, you'll be able to fire off a total of 15 lightning bolts. The way that this damage is going to behave is going to change depending on how many enemies you're battling. So for example, if you're battling 3 enemies, your damage is going to be split out 3 different ways. If you're fighting just 1 enemy, then all of those turrets can just hit 1 single enemy for a total of 15 hits. Basically, Yae's E skill is a glorified Oz, except Yae is able to summon 3 Oz at once. They're a bit slower in how often they attack though, so although they're similar, there are some very stark differences. Next up is Yae's Elemental Burst. This is an incredibly high scaling Electro nuke. Casting her burst will cause one singular lightning strike, and then for each Sesho Sakura that is nearby, it will destroy them and then cast another lightning bolt called the Tenko Thunderbolt for a total of 4 lightning bolts, one for the cast and then one for each turret. When you're playing Yae, you should always prioritize putting all 3 of your turrets down before you cast your Elemental Burst. This burst is incredibly high cost and cooldown. 90 energy and 22 seconds of cooldown, matching Raiden Shogun's Elemental Burst. The scaling at level 8 for the first Thunderbolt is 416% scaling, and then for each Tenko Thunderbolt, it's 534% scaling. So go ahead and do the math for this, and you get a total scaling of about 2000%. That's pretty damn strong. And so that power is offset by the high energy cost and the long cooldown. There are some implications here that you want to think about. When it comes to Raiden Shogun, the energy cost was not a huge problem because you built energy recharge on her. In my experience, more often than not, my burst was charged, but the burst was still on cooldown. Yae Miko does not have that same ability. You do not really build energy recharge in order to increase her damage any further. This means that Yae is going to be incredibly reliant on Electro Particles and even Raiden Shogun herself. From a lore perspective, that makes a lot of sense. So if your Yae Miko team just doesn't supply enough energy particles, Yae is going to have both problems. Not enough energy, and also having to wait a minimum of 22 seconds. Although, if you don't have enough energy, then the 22 seconds cooldown doesn't really matter. The 22 seconds only matters once you've got enough energy for her. Alright, next up we can go ahead and move on to her passive skills. Her first passive skill is that when casting her Elemental Burst, each Sesho Sakura destroyed will reset the cooldown of her E skill. In essence, you basically get all your turrets back when you cast your Elemental Burst. And of course, you should always burst when you have 3 turrets out on the field. So what this passive skill does is that it smooths out her gameplay so you're not awkwardly waiting around for a second or two after casting her Elemental Burst, waiting for your E skill cooldowns. Because basically, after you burst, you just want to reset your turrets and then switch back off. Yae's second passive skill will increase the damage of her E skill by 0.15% for every point of elemental mastery she has. Now, it is currently unclear whether this damage bonus is like elemental goblets or if it's a direct scaling modifier. Both boosts actually provide very similar damage results. It doesn't really matter too much. Obviously, one is going to be better in certain situations and the other better in other situations. For this one, we'll just have to wait and see when she comes out. So this is a very nice passive effect, but it does not mean you should go out of your way to build more elemental mastery on your Yae. So you should not be building main stats on your artifact pieces because you'll actually end up doing less damage on your elemental skill if you don't have any attack percentage. You might get some better elemental reaction damage like overload and electro charged, but the damage coming out of your turrets is definitely going to suffer. You could perhaps go for a Taser or Overload comp building for Elemental Mastery's main stats. That could definitely potentially work, but until we see how her reactions interact with other characters, this build will have to wait for some experimentation. We don't really know what her internal cooldown is. We don't know if Yae is going to be triggering the reactions or not. When she comes out, you can definitely expect me to experiment with these different kinds of teams, so you should definitely swing by the stream if you want to check that out. I will definitely be posting updated guides and builds when she actually comes out. Alright, her last passive skill. She adds a gotcha whenever you craft character talent materials. You're going to have a 25% chance to get one regional character talent material when crafting, and the rarity is going to be that of the base material. So say you craft a Leewood Diligence book by using 3 blues to get a purple, there's a 25% chance you'll get a random talent material, either the prosperity or the gold. And since you used blue, if the passive procs, you'll get an extra blue. That's at least my interpretation of it. We'll see if I got that one right. Alright, so now let's talk some preliminary damage. First, we gotta go over assumptions and parameters. First off, calculations are going to be done with a level 80 Yae with talent level 8, and she's going to be Ascension Phase 5. She's gonna hold plus 20 artifacts, and her substats are what I consider to be average for a Yae. We're gonna have 7 elemental mastery stats, 3 attack percentage substats, and 13 crit stats adjusted depending on the weapon to balance our crit ratio. Since Raiden is such an obvious partner to pair with Yae, if you decide not to use Raiden, there's going to be about a 15% difference in damage on your elemental bursts. And then when it comes to elemental mastery substats, in order to get that extra E skill damage bonus, if you don't have this, assuming the 7 elemental mastery rolls that I assumed in my calculations, you can lose upwards of 10.3% damage on your E skill. 7 elemental mastery rolls is about 161 elemental mastery, and that equates to about 24% damage bonus. And so this means that Yae might be a little bit difficult to build because you need a lot of different subsets, unlike some other characters. Yae is heavily reliant on energy recharge, elemental mastery, crit, and attack. Most other characters just want either attack and crit, and maybe a dab of energy recharge. And if they're reaction based, then a little bit of elemental mastery is desirable. If you want your solo Yae to deal as much damage as possible, then you don't want to build elemental mastery main stats. This is because sacrificing attack percentage or electro damage bonus just isn't worth it when you convert the elemental mastery you get from main stats into just more damage bonus on just your E skill. Alright, now in terms of artifacts, when I show you these numbers, there was one very big assumption that we made, and we just considered 15 ticks of her elemental skill to be one rotation, when really, if you want to just consider Yae's entire duration from when she can cast her burst and when she can cast it again, it would be 22 seconds, and there would be more than 15 ticks of your E skill then. But just to make the math a little bit easier, I just went with 15 ticks. And so first off, we have the 4-piece Noblesse Oblige, and this artifact set can be really good if Yae gets the boost from the 4-piece set bonus at the moment when she casts her elemental burst. This is because some characters in the game also behave this way, where when they cast their burst, they immediately get that 20% attack boost, and their burst is instantly affected by that attack boost. So if Yae's elemental burst behaves this way, this is going to be a pretty good set for her. The only downside is that the set bonus effect won't last long enough for Yae's entire E skill duration. So that means you're only going to have about a 50% uptime for the 20% attack boost for her turrets. 2-piece Thundering Fury and 2-piece Gladiator, this artifact set will boost her E skill damage the most because we get both an attack percent buff and a 15% electro damage buff. These buffs are unconditional, so the uptime on these are 100%. So that's why this set is just solid and very consistent. Next would be 4-piece Thundering Fury. The 4-piece set bonus does have a use in certain playstyles. The 4-piece set bonus to lower your cooldowns is not really going to be useful for Yae because she's going to be off of the field doing her damage, and so the effect won't activate. Also, her elemental skill is already pretty low cooldown. The 4-piece set bonus, however, will be good if you want to go for a transformative reaction playstyle, which is certainly very viable. This is because the 4-piece set bonus will increase the damage on Overloaded, Electrocharged, and Superconduct. If Yae is able to be the trigger character in elemental reactions, then a 4-piece Thundering Fury could be really good. However, until she comes out, this is just going to be speculation, so we're going to need to do some experimentation when she finally releases. You can definitely expect that type of content to be on this channel, so now would be a good time to subscribe if you're interested in that. Next up is a 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate, and this artifact set is good if you can build enough energy recharge on her. But since you won't really be building energy recharge on her main stats or on her weapon, you're going to have to rely heavily on your artifact subsets. This artifact set will provide some extra consistency though, with 20% extra energy recharge in exchange for damage when compared to all of her other choices. 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate is going to be her lowest damaging artifact set unless you can get good energy recharge substats. However, if you get good energy recharge substats, that means you're going to be sacrificing crit, attack, or elemental mastery subsets. But of course, since these are artifacts, we kind of just have to work with what we got. So if you do manage to get some really good substats, then you can get your elemental burst to start doing a lot of damage. However, your E skill will continue to do the least amount of damage when compared to all of the other artifact sets. If we were to directly compare it to a Thundering Fury or a Gladiator set, your E skill damage is going to have about a 15% difference in damage. Whereas with your elemental burst, you're getting less than 5% extra damage. Next up is a 4-piece Millis set, and this is a very solid set if you want to play Yae in a support role. And I know that we all just want to make Yae do as much damage as possible, but Yae really can function solidly as a Millis support character, especially since her E skill has virtually 100% uptime. This is going to provide an attack percent buff to everyone, and this artifact set gives us room so that we can build elemental mastery, potentially, on our main stats. This is because we can build attack percentage through the bonuses of other 4-piece set bonuses. For example, with the 4-piece Militant set that she is going to wear if she runs a support set, and then also a 4-piece Noblesse Oblige from one of your other characters. We'll go into more depth about this type of playstyle in another video. The next set is going to be a 2-piece Wanderer set with a 2-piece of whatever else you want. Gladiator, Thundering Fury, or Noblesse Oblige. The 80 Elemental Mastery will just boost your E-skill damage though, but this set has the potential to have the strongest E-skill damage out of all the other sets. Next up, we got a quick weapon rundown. You'll notice immediately that the Widsith is an absolutely crazy weapon, but this is of course when it has its passive buffs. When the Widsith does have its passive buffs, it does surpass the damage of even her signature weapon, the Kagura's Verity, especially if you get either the attack or damage bonus buff. The Elemental Mastery buff is still pretty decent because it boosts our E-skill damage, but it doesn't boost anything else. Also, very obviously, it would boost elemental reaction damage as well. However, you have to consider the Widsith's uptime and rotation. This graph kind of shows what it would look like if you just considered the pure damage numbers that this weapon is outputting. Yes, it will produce some pretty big numbers, but its uptime is low and it's not very consistent, unlike her signature weapon. And so when the Widsith does lose its buffs, it drops down to being one of the worst weapons on this list. Kagura's Verity is going to give you the most consistency because the passive skill is very easy to maintain. Solar Pearl is a very solid generalist weapon, but it does require you to play around its passive. You gotta drop a normal attack before using your skills. Every other 5-star weapon is also pretty good and performs relatively the same. The Skyward Atlas is just a smidge stronger, since Yae doesn't maintain any stacks from the Lost Prayer. And you also get a little bit of extra damage from the cloud damage. Memory of Dust is basically in the same boat as Skyward Atlas, but this one is now tied to a shield. Other free-to-play choices like Dodoko Tales, Mappa Mare, and Blackcliff are also solid choices if free-to-play is your only choice. Mappa Mare is great because the Elemental Mastery is a nice boost to your E-skill damage, and Dodoko Tales probably isn't as good because it's going to require you to use your charge attacks in order to get an attack percent buff. Blackcliff is just a solid choice because of the weapon stat giving you crit damage. However, just like always, this weapon suffers from its passive ability. If you can get stacks, it's very good, but if you can't, then it's just incredibly average. It also requires you to spend some star glitter, so whether or not you want to spend that is totally up to you. But anyway, a more in-depth weapon analysis will be conducted later, so definitely stick around for that. Next up are some teams that we can make with the Yae. However, these are just some initial teams that I could think of, and as she comes out and we experiment more, I'm sure we can find more teams. So the first one I think is one of the most obvious teams to run with Yae Miko, and that's with a Raiden, a Sarah, or a Bennett, and then an Anemo character. If you have C6 Sarah, it'll probably be more desirable over Bennett, and then the Anemo is just to shred that Electro damage and increase your damage even further. Kazuha is your #1 choice because he'll both shred and give extra damage bonus. The next two teams are reaction-based teams, one being an overloaded team and the other being a taser team. Your overload team, you'll probably want to bring Xiangling and Bennett, and then with your taser team, you'll want to bring some kind of Hydra character. Kokomi and Xingqiu are both really good choices. And then for the 4th slot for both of these teams, you can go with either a Viridescent Venerer support or a shield support. Viridescent Venerer giving you more damage, shield support giving you more survivability and comfiness. For the Raiden team, you probably want to run some sort of DPS focused artifact set like 2-piece Thundering Fury and 2-piece Gladiator, or 4-piece Noblesse, or 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate. Then with the Overload and Taser comp, probably want to run something like a 4-piece Thundering Fury to increase that elemental reaction damage even further. However, I did mention earlier that we don't know how Yae's elements are going to react with other characters and whether or not Yae is going to be the trigger character. If Yae is not the trigger character, then you'll have to build Elemental Mastery on the character that actually triggers the elemental reactions. And now the last team, the last build is a support Yae, and we are going to build Yae with a Millilith build so that she can provide an attack percent bonus. We're also going to be running a shielder like Zhongli, and then any kind of DPS and sub-DPS core, like for example, Xiangling and Bennett. So this team is going to provide a pretty strong amount of survivability, as well as some decent damage and elemental reaction damage. We have extra shield strength from Millith. We have some extra shield strength with Millith. Either Xiangling or Bennett can run a 4-piece Noblesse Oblige. And then our shielder, if you have Zhongli, can also be another Millith user. Millith can stack, I'm pretty sure, because in its artifact description, nowhere in the set bonus does it say that it cannot stack, unlike the 4-piece Noblesse buff. And so with all of these extra attack percent bonuses, we'll still be able to do some pretty good damage. But yeah, I do think that support Yae is going to be a very interesting role to play for her, and I'm definitely going to explore this type of build more on this channel. Here are some closing thoughts. I think that Yae has two very solid playstyles. One where you focus a lot on Electro damage and trying to get Yae's damage as much as possible with both her E skill and her burst, and you also try to charge her burst as much as possible, so you have a very strong focus on Electro. The other is where you play her in a sub-DPS support role with the Millith set and focus more on her E skill. I also think that Yae's E skill is more of the core of the character and less so than her elemental burst. Her E skill has a lot of utility and you can get really creative with this ability. I'm going to assume that this is going to have a very high internal cooldown because that's the pattern that we've been getting with a lot of the new characters lately, and it might actually work in our favor because it means that it will likely mean that Yae will be the trigger character in elemental reactions. This means that we can have Yae built for elemental mastery to give her E skill some much needed damage bonus, and then that extra elemental mastery means our elemental reaction damage, especially our transformative elemental reaction damage, is going to be really strong. I think that either playstyle can work though. The Electro focused one being a little bit more obvious, and the support focused one I think has a lot of potential to be incredibly strong. Anyway guys, you should definitely join the Discord and come visit the stream. Links are down below. We have a lot of experimenting to do when she finally drops, so you should definitely swing on by. I hope this video helped you out, and if you enjoyed the content, drop a like, consider subscribing to the channel, and let me know how you guys plan to build her, and are you guys excited? Until next time, I will see you guys later.